this PowerPoint, we'll be taking a look at the integumentary system. An overview of the integumentary system. The integumentary system is made up of skin and accessory organs such as nail and hair. Skin is the body's largest and heaviest organ, making up 15% of total body weight. Most skin is about 1 to 2 millimeters thick. There are two layers of skin that form the cutaneous membrane. They include the epidermis, which is made up of stratified squamous epithelium, and the dermis, which is made up of connective tissue. Together, these two are referred to as cutaneous membrane. Below the dermis, you will find the hypodermis. The hypodermis is referred to as the subcutaneous membrane. The hypodermis is made up of connective tissue. Functions of skin include 1. Resistance to trauma and infection. Skin is composed of keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, which is densely packed cells with a protein called keratin. This results in making skin resistant to trauma, as well as providing a physical barrier against infection. Skin is also dry and acidic. This environment helps to prevent the growth of microbes. 2. Skin has other barrier functions as well, such as preventing water from entering or leaving the body. Skin is also a barrier to UV rays and many harmful chemicals. 3. Skin allows for vitamin D synthesis. It initiates the process by using the UV radiation and the warmth of the sun to convert steroids into what will eventually become vitamin D, otherwise known as calcidiol. Vitamin D is important for bone development and maintenance. Skin also functions in sensation. Skin contains many nerve endings for various sensations, such as heat, cold, touch, texture, pressure, vibration, and pain. Skin also functions in thermoregulation. It contains mechanisms that allow the body to maintain homeostasis by warming or cooling the body down. Mechanisms include vasodilation, vasoconstriction, as well as sweating. Lastly, skin allows for nonverbal communication, such as facial expression along with skeletal muscles. As it allows for nonverbal communication through physical image as well, such as when a person has acne or a birthmark or a scar. Here's a diagram of our epidermis, its stratums, and the various cells. The epidermis is made up of keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. Some characteristics of the epidermis include that it contains dead cells at the surface that are packed with tough protein called keratin. It lacks blood vessels, and because of this, depends on the diffusion of nutrients from the underlying connective tissue, in other words, the dermis. It also has sparse nerve endings for touch and pain. Going from deep to superficial, the epidermis is composed of the following stratums. The stratum bacilli is the deepest and is made up of one layer of cells. This is the site for new skin cell production. The cells here appear cuboidal at first, but become stratified squamous as they move throughout the other stratums. This is why the epidermis is classified as stratified squamous epithelium. There are a number of cell types found in this stratum. There are the stem cells that divide and become keratinocytes. The keratinocytes are the basic skin cells. They are layered throughout the stratums to form the protective thickness of skin. They produce a protein called keratin, which makes the skin waterproof and durable. There are also melanocytes. These cells produce melanin, a pigment protein, which absorbs UV light and prevents it from going deeper. We all have the same number of melanocytes. What changes is the amount of melanin produced. Melanin is one of the pigments that gives our skin color. Individuals with darker skin color produce more melanin. This is due to the fact that our ancestors lived in climates with intense UV radiation. To prevent and limit the amount of radiation, more melanin is produced. Individuals with fairer skin have ancestors who lived in climates with less intense radiation and did not need as much UV protection. These cells are not only found these cells are only found in this layer. Then there are the tactile cells. The tactile cells are attached to neurons in the underlying dermis and allow for sensation. Moving up one stratum is the stratum spinosum. The stratum spinosum oftentimes is the thickest layer, except for in thick skin. It consists of keratinocytes and dendritic cells. The keratinocytes are the same as the previous layer, but they're starting to flatten out. The dendritic cells are a type of white blood cells, also called macrophages. They patrol the skin and look for invading organisms and materials. Their role is more of a scout than destroyer. They are not necessarily limited to this layer, but commonly found here. The next stratum up is the stratum granulosum. The stratum granulosum consists of 3 to 5 layers of keratinocytes that at this point start to produce a protein called keratin. Keratin creates a waterproof barrier for skin that keeps water in and prevents dehydration through evaporation. The keratinocytes at this layer begin to die because they move away from the stratum bacilli and lack the blood supply as well as oxygen needed for metabolism. The stratum lucidium is found only in thick skin, such as areas of the soles of your feet and the palms of your hands. This layer contains keratinocytes that are densely packed and produce a clear protein called iletin. The stratum corneum is the top layer, the most superficial layer. It is composed of many layers, approximately 30, of dead keratinocytes and keratin. And that's why at this layer we refer to them as exfoliating keratinocytes. The keratinized cells are especially resistant to abrasion, penetration, and water loss. This layer is shed as new keratinocytes are made and pushed up from the stratum bacilli. To summarize the epidermis layer, the epidermis layer consists of the stratum bacilli. This layer is the deepest and has one layer of cells. The keratinocytes, melanocytes, and tactile cells can be found in this layer. The stratum spinosum is the thickest layer except for in thick skin, and they consist of flattening keratinocytes as well as dendritic cells. The stratum granulosum is a layer with keratinocytes that contain granules called keratin. The stratum lucidium, this layer is only found in thick skin. And the stratum corneum, which is the most superficial layer and contains dead keratinocytes and keratin. This is a diagram of all the layers. A few key points to know about the epidermis. It takes about 30 to 40 days for a keratinocyte to make its way to the surface and be sloughed off. The epidermis is avascular. In other words, it does not contain blood vessels. It does have a nerve supply through the tactile cells. It is classified as highly mitotic as it is one of the fastest reproducing cells in the body. The next layer is the dermis. The dermis provides support for the epidermis and is much thicker than the epidermis. There's a distinct line between the dermis and epidermis, formed by the dermal papilla of the dermis and the epidermal ridges. These structures work like Legos with the finger-like projections that lock together. They keep the dermis in place and help it resist slipping and stress. The dermis is made up of dense, irregular, and areolar connective tissue. The areolar tissue is on the top, more superficial layer that can be found directly underneath the epidermis. There's also lots of collagen and elastin fibers found in the dermis, which provide some stretchiness and elasticity to your skin. There's also a good nerve supply and blood supply. It also contains associated structures such as glands, hair, and follicles. Underneath the dermis is the subcutaneous membrane, or the hypodermis. This layer is beneath the skin and binds the skin to underlying tissues and structures. It is sometimes considered the third layer of skin, depending on who you talk to, but it is technically different, and our author separates it from skin. The boundary between the dermis and the hypodermis is not as well defined as it is between the dermis and the epidermis. Generally, the hypodermis is more areolar and adipose tissue than the dermis. The adipose acts as an insulator for thermal regulation and energy reservoir. The hypodermis, or subcutaneous membrane, also has large blood supply with lots of blood vessels. It also contains carotene, a yellow pigment that comes from vitamin A in our diet. Carotene is found in the subcutaneous fat, mostly commonly in thick skin, like calluses, and adds color to the skin. Sometimes carotene can also be found in the stratum corneum. Recall that skin is a membrane. Before moving on, take a moment to consider how it compares to the other membranes we've discussed at the end of our histology presentation. How similar or different is skin to the other membranes? One of the most important functions of skin is vitamin D synthesis, or the production of vitamin D. The keratinocytes use UV radiation to convert 7-dehydrocholesterol, a steroid, to pre-vitamin D. Over 3 days, pre-vitamin D is fully converted to vitamin D, which then travels in the blood to the liver. The liver converts the vitamin D to calcidiol by adding a hydroxyl group. Calcidiol travels to the kidney, where another hydroxyl group is added, converting the molecule to calcitriol. Calcitriol is the most functional form of vitamin D. It helps the small intestine and bones absorb more calcium and reduce the amount of calcium excreted by the kidneys. To go through the steps again with a diagram, the keratinocytes use UV radiation to convert a steroid called 7-dehydrocholesterol into a pre-vitamin D. The pre-vitamin D then, over 3 days, gets fully converted into vitamin D. The vitamin D travels then through the blood to the liver. When it reaches the liver converts the vitamin D to calcidiol by adding a hydroxyl group. The calcidiol then travels to the kidneys, and the kidneys also add a hydroxyl group, which then results in calcitriol. Glands are the first associate structures that we will discuss. There are 2 types of glands, exocrine and endocrine glands. The exocrine gland uses ducts and pores to transport their products, and endocrine glands use the blood supply to transport theirs. We will talk a great deal about the endocrine at the end of the semester. There are a number of exocrine glands in the integumentary system. First one are sweat glands. Sweat glands are found in the dermis, and there are 2 types, the merocrine and apocrine glands. The merocrine sweat glands are the most numerous glands in the skin. They produce a watery substance that allows for temperature regulation and waste removal. Perspiration or sweat is primarily composed of water, sodium chloride, potassium, urea, lactic acid, and ammonia. Certain drugs and toxins can also be removed through sweat. The merocrine sweat glands produce 2 types of perspiration. There is the insensible perspiration, which is secreted but does not produce a visible wetness to the skin. On average, a person produces about 500 milliliters of insensible perspiration per day. Then there is also the diaphoresis perspiration that occurs during exercise and strenuous activity. This does produce a visible wetness to the skin. There are about 3 to 4 million merocrine glands found in the adult body. The apocrine sweat glands occur in the groin, axilla, and areola. They tend to develop at puberty. These are sweat glands that act as scent glands that release a chemical called pheromones in response to stress and sexual stimulation. The apocrine sweat glands contains ducts that lead to nearby hair follicles rather than an independent sweat pore like seen with the merocrine sweat glands. Note, sweat does not actually smell. Odor is the result of bacteria breaking down the stale sweat, which then releases a fatty acid that has a strong odor. Secondly, there are the sebaceous glands. These produce an oily substance called sebum. Sebum keeps the skin from being dry and brittle. It also helps to make hair shiny. It is basically our natural lotion. Ducts usually open into hair follicles, however, some can open to the surface directly. Acne results when these glands produce a large number of sebum that sticks to the skin cell and then plugs up the hair follicle. The situation develops when bacteria get trapped in the glands, and this results in redness, swelling, and lesions that we commonly refer to as acne. Thirdly, there are the ceruminous glands. The ceruminous glands are found only in the external ear canal. They secrete cerumen, which is a form of earwax. Their ducts lead directly to the surface of the skin. Cerumen waterproofs the ear canal and keeps the eardrum pliable. Another accessory organ is hair, also known as pilus. It is a slender filament of keratinized cells. It is found everywhere but the tips of the toes and fingers, palms and soles, lips, nipples, and some parts of the genitals. It is divided into zones called the bulb, the root, and the shaft. The bulb is where hair originates in the dermis or hypodermis, and it contains living hair cells. The root is the remainder of the hair in the follicle. The shaft is the portion of hair that is above the skin surface. Hair is contained in a follicle or an oblique tube in skin that allows hair to grow. Under the bulb, at the base of the follicle, the dermal papilla provides blood capillaries. The pillow erector or erector pilli is a muscle that causes the hair to stand up in response to fear, cold, and other stimuli. This is an involuntary muscle. Hair has numerous functions. One is vestigial, which is functionalist. In other words, evolution has not gotten rid of it. However, it is probably retained for warmth. 2. Stimulation of hair alerts us to parasites, fleas, bugs, and other insects on our skin. 3. It helps the scalp retain heat and protects from sunburn. 4. It aids in identification of sex and individuals. Let's go through hair and its accessory structures. Hair starts off with the hair bulb. The hair bulb is where hair originates in the dermis, or sometimes deeper within the hypodermis. You will find living hair cells within the hair bulb that are mitotic and divide and push the hair up, and that's how your hair elongates. After the hair bulb, you have the hair root. The hair root is the remainder of the hair that is still within the follicle. Then, exposed above the skin surface, you will find the hair shaft. Associated with the hair follicle, you will find the pillow erector muscle. This is smooth muscle that's involuntary, and it can respond to fear or cold that causes the hair to be pulled up and lead to conditions like goosebumps. Also associated with hair follicles are the sebaceous glands. Recall that the sebaceous glands produce a chemical called sebum that moisturizes the skin and hair. Occasionally, however, since you can see how close it is to the surface, it can become trapped, it can become blocked and thus trap bacteria, and that can lead to acne. Also associated with hair follicles are the apocrine sweat glands. Recall that these are your scent glands that produces pheromones. Then lastly, there are the blood vessels in the dermal papilla that then supply blood to the hair bulb and that is what allows the hair cells to undergo mitosis and divide and produce more. Nails are also an accessory organ. They are a clear, hard derivative of the stram corneum. Flat nails are one of the distinguishing characteristics of primates such as humans, monkeys, and great apes. They allow for more sensitive and tactile fingertips. There are two primary portions, the nail matrix and the nail plate. The nail matrix is the growth zone beneath the skin. The nail plate is the hard part of the nail. The nail plate includes the free edge, which is the portion that overhangs the fingertip, the nail body, which is the visible attached part of the nail, and the nail root, which extends proximally under the overlying skin. Let's go through the structures of the nail together. First, you have the nail plate. Recall that the nail plate is the hard part of the nail. The nail plate includes the following: the free edge, this is the portion that overhangs the fingertip, the nail body, which is the visible attached part of the nail, and then the nail root, which extends proximally underneath the overlying skin. Then you have the nail matrix, and it's within the nail matrix that growth of the nail occurs.